The information contained in this video is intended for educational purposes. We are not responsible for any damage to your device resulting from improper disassembly or installation. Proceed at your own risk.
Hey, this is Mike from GoCellPhoneRepair.com, and today I'm going to show you in great detail how to replace a screen on an iPhone 4S. I realize there are plenty of iPhone 4S repair videos out there, but we can always improve on what we have, and as time goes by, we get better at the techniques that we use to not only repair, but demonstrate how to perform a repair. So my objective here is to make this repair even easier, as it is one of those phones that's kind of a headache to deal with. What we're going to do first of all is make sure that we have the power turned off, if at all possible. I know sometimes you can't turn them off. Go ahead and remove your SIM card tray. We need to take that out because it runs through the logic board, which we will have to remove in order to get the screen off of the midframe. And from here we'll have our two pentalobe screws at the very bottom adjacent to the charging port. Go ahead and take those out. And then if you grip the back of the phone with your hands and just kind of slide it gently upwards, sometimes you have to press pretty hard to make it move, but that will allow the back panel to come off. And then we're going to have two screws here that hold the charging port terminal in place, the battery terminal in place. So we'll go ahead and take those out. Here's a close-up so you can get a good look at what needs to be removed. And then underneath the terminal, you're going to have a very small black panel that's part of the antenna system. So you'll reach in there with some tweezers, go ahead and take this out, and remember it goes underneath the terminal, not on top. A lot of people make a mistake of putting this on last. It actually goes in before you connect the battery. Once you have that out of the way, you want to gently pry underneath this piece and be very careful here. If these things get stuck, it is possible to damage the interface on the board itself. So just take your time, be very gentle, and you'll see that disconnects. It's kind of a variation of a pop connector there, and you can lift it up. From here, we're going to heat the battery to the point where it's going to be warm to the touch. We don't need to get too hot with these. As a general rule, you never really want to go above about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And from here, there's a safe pry area right here on the side of the battery. This is the only area that I would recommend prying on the battery. Anywhere else and you can cause damage to other parts of the phone. And don't worry about that little plastic tab on the left. Those things are usually pretty worthless when it comes to removing the battery. Now, it might take you a little time to work in here on the inside, but if you're just patient and persistent, eventually you'll be able to get in between the battery and the side of the frame. You can see I kind of went with the corner there, and then just work your way very gently across the bottom. And once the adhesive releases, you can go ahead and pull that out and set it aside for now. I'd recommend with the sticky side up, that way it doesn't get stuck on your table. And I find it helpful to fold this little plastic piece over so it kind of stays out of the way. Two screws here that hold the charging port interface in place. So after you take those out, there's a metal retaining clip that comes off, and then you'll be able to disconnect the charging port flex cable from the logic board. Take your time when you do this. There will generally be some adhesive underneath this flex cable, so you may want to heat it up and then just gently kind of peel it downwards till you get to the point where it folds out at the bottom. So you don't want to go too far down there. From this point, we're going to disconnect the antenna wire. Be very careful with this. You don't want to put a lot of stress on the place where the metal connector meets the plastic of the wire itself. So if you kind of get underneath the metal piece and just gently pull it up, and then you'll fish it, you can see it kind of zigzags here around that screw at the bottom. That is a threaded barrel that we're going to take out last. That's the very last screw I generally take out. The EMI shield will have 4 screws at the top, and there's one particular here right in the corner. You want to be very careful with this. It's easy to tear the threaded barrel underneath that off the board if you're not careful. Sometimes it helps to put a little bit of downward pressure on it while you're releasing it. And of course, when you put it back on, don't over tighten. Now there's a small metal clip here at the very top. You want to kind of carefully get inside there and just pry it down a little bit so that it disengages, and that should release the EMI shield at the top. There are 2 tabs at the bottom that are going to slide out. So you see I just kind of lift it up here from the top after the clip is disengaged, and then you can just kind of slide that upwards. From here, we can go ahead and disconnect all of the flex cables. I recommend that you start with the lens digitizer LCD first. It's not 100% required on this one. In fact, you can access the camera cable, but generally those two should come off first, just for good practice. And then we can go ahead and disconnect the camera and remove it from the board. And then we'll have 3 additional cables. One is actually hidden under this cable that I just removed. So you'll have these 2 underneath. Go ahead and disconnect those as well. Very carefully, there are components on the board, so you don't want to take anything else but the connector itself away from the logic board. Now I'm going to apply some heat. There is a sticker at the top left-hand corner here that's going to cover a hidden screw. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up. If you don't know that this screw is here, you can cause damage to the PCB. So make sure that you peel this off. I'm not 100% certain as to why they put the sticker here, but I believe it's to prevent accidental grounding. So I recommend you set that aside and put it back on when you're finished. And you can see there's actually one up in the corner here as well that will hide one of the screws that we need to take out in order to remove the LCD. So again, 2 hidden screws at the top left-hand corner. When you're looking at the back of the phone, make sure that you have these removed, or it's going to make your life much more difficult. Now we have a very small screw up here at the top right-hand side of the logic board that's going to come out, and that's actually inside of a threaded barrel. And once you remove that, there is a retaining clip that's going to lift straight up towards the ceiling. You can kind of get it underneath it here from the bottom and just gently pull it straight out towards the ceiling again. You don't have to slide in either direction. And once this comes out, there's a very small antenna wire here that we can disconnect from the top. Watch out for that little white chip. It's in a very dangerous position, and of course you don't want to knock that off the board. That can be bad news as well. And once you've got this off, we have a few more screws that we're going to take out. And we'll start with the camera grounding screw up here at the top. There's a little piece that's going to come out here. You see a gold part, and I'll show you later on exactly where that goes, but it's always good to take note of the position that that's in. A lot of people can't figure out exactly how to put it together. All right, so we've got a screw down here just above the silent ringer vibrator. Go ahead and take that out. And then there's going to be one right about the center of the board also. And I find it easiest to remove these other threaded barrels both at the same time because I generally start out with a slotted driver in order to loosen them. They're kind of a funny design. They're not really Phillips, they're not really slotted. But if you start with the slotted driver, you can loosen it a little bit. And then when we go to put these back in, I'll generally start with the Phillips tip in order to get it threaded, and then you can use the slotted to tighten it down the rest of the way. And when I say tighten, keep in mind we don't have to go very tight with any of these screws. This isn't like a lug nut. So the last one that we take out down here at the bottom is actually going to release the board. So it should start to lift up just a little bit after you take this one out. What we'll do from here is just kind of lift it out from the bottom. Make sure that you negotiate this so that it doesn't get caught on any of those cables in the process. And you should be able to lift it up and just slightly slide it down towards the bottom end of the phone. And you'll notice that this little rubber piece often will fall off of the logic board. So I'm going to go in here with the tweezers. And what this does is it sits on top of the board and prevents that sharp edge from cutting through the LCD and digitizer cable. So that's going to go right here on the top. Make sure that you still have that in the phone. Kind of important. 2 screws down here to release the charging port, and I'm going to also include some pictures here to show you what to watch out for when we put this back in. The important thing is that you can lift the charging port up, but do not push down on it. It's very easy to damage these 4 little metal pieces that are right on top of it, which you'll see later on in the video. So once you have those out, you can just kind of pull this straight away from the phone. There's a small plastic triangle piece that was on the left-hand side. When we go to the installation, you'll see that also. So keep an eye out for that. You don't want to lose it. From here, we want to heat up the silent ringer vibrator, and then you can just kind of go straight underneath it. Any very thin flat edge will work, and that will peel right off of the frame. Again, I recommend you set this down sticky side up so it doesn't get attached to anything. And from here, we've got 4 screws in the corner of the mid frame. as well as 3 additional screws with washers down on the sides. And all 10 of these need to come out. You don't have to worry too much about mixing them up because they're all different, or they're basically just 2 different sizes. And you'll see here, first the screw comes out, and then sometimes the washers fall down inside or get stuck to the adhesive. So make sure you get both of those pieces out. Magnetizing will help make this task much easier. And I always save this one screw for the last. It's generally the most difficult one to get out. I might make it look easy in this video, but a lot of times we really struggle with this because of the position that it's in. So take your time, be patient. This screw has to come out. I've noticed a lot of people who do repairs do not put it back in because it's equally as difficult, if not more so, to get it back inside the frame. But we like to get the phone to being complete as it was before we started. You notice I tucked the charging port over there to the side. I kind of like to do that just to keep it out of the way. From here, we'll heat the top and the bottom ends of the LCD. You do not have to heat up the display itself, just those black or white stripes at the top and bottom. That's the only place you're going to encounter adhesive. So from here, we'll start prying at the bottom, and on the 4S, the home button is actually going to stay with the LCD when we remove it. So no worries about taping over that if you wanted to do so in order to keep the glass from shattering into small pieces. It'll lift out from the bottom, and then these cables, you'll have to kind of feed them through so they don't get trapped. They have sort of an L shape, so a bit of a twisting motion here as it comes out of the frame. And again, you may have to just kind of assist it to come through there. And from here, what we want to do is go ahead and remove all of the existing adhesive, or at least any parts that have glass stuck to them. So if you've got a nice clean piece of adhesive and the phone wasn't broken in that area, you can often go ahead and reuse that piece. But if you see any paint or any broken glass, definitely peel the stuff off and replace it with new adhesive. It's going to be the best way to get the glass out of the phone, and make sure you don't have anything trapped under the new lens, because if you do, it's very easy to break them. So you'll notice I actually left that bottom right hand section on because it was pretty clean. And these are very nice. They come in strips, rolls basically, and you will have to punch out some of these holes. There are areas where you don't want the adhesive to cover the phone, and they're already pre-perforated, so you can go in here with a small razor blade or whatever works for you and just kind of punch out those little squares that they have outlined in the sheet. And carefully lay this down. You don't want the home button to get stuck to it, so it is kind of important that we get these things in the proper position. Probably the trickiest part about it is getting the entire adhesive off of the sheet. A lot of times it likes to stick to the paper, so you peel off the wax paper and the adhesive is still there, and then it becomes a little more difficult to work with. You'll see shortly a good demonstration of that, because on this next piece, I believe it is, or the one after, probably this one, I think the wax paper came off and the adhesive is actually still on the sheet, which is kind of a headache. I got lucky on this one. I was able to get it off without it sticking to itself, but that's usually an issue. So this is just the adhesive itself without the sticker on top of it that I'm moving over. Now we want to make sure that everything that was on the old assembly is moved over to the new one unless it's already there. So we've got our proximity sensor foam, our mesh for our speaker, and then our front-facing camera guard. So if your new screen already has that stuff, you don't have to worry about it, but a lot of times they don't, especially that little foam piece. So I'll usually add a little bit of heat here at the top. That plastic piece is actually glued onto the glass, and in this case, my new piece already has it, but you can go underneath this with a razor blade or some other thin object and generally kind of break it away from the screen. and then we'll use some adhesive to hold it in place later. You'll see these usually will go flying across the room when you pry them off, like that one did. So we've got the plastic ring, then we've got the earpiece grill here, and even if you don't need this, it doesn't hurt to peel it off and save it. You never know when you might get a replacement screen that doesn't have this hardware, so I keep all this extra stuff just in case. And the final thing, and probably one of the most difficult, is getting the proximity sensor foam off of the glass without damaging it. And do take note of its position. You want to have it in the same position when you put it on the new lens. And what that will do is separate the light and motion that's coming through the glass, those little purple windows, so that your phone knows when to shut the screen off. So on this one, I was fortunate. It all came off at one time. You can buy or make replacement proximity sensor foams. I actually have an entire video devoted to that. If you run into any trouble with this, I'd recommend you view it. It should be helpful as far as getting everything working properly again. Right, now we need to move the home button from the old assembly to the new one. So we're going to heat this up, and very carefully, I usually take my smallest finger and just kind of push from the front of the phone. We want the adhesive to stay on that rubber gasket when we move it over, but that doesn't always happen. So if this isn't sticky when you get it off, you will have to add some adhesive to the lens itself in order to make that stay in place. Ideally, you would want to surround the entire home button with adhesive, but that can be very time consuming and difficult to get something that perfectly round. So for our purposes, I'm just going to demonstrate how we add enough adhesive to hold the button in place. And very important to make sure that your square is straight. If you put it on crooked, you're going to notice it later, or your customer's going to notice it later. And it's very annoying when these things aren't lined up properly. So make sure you get that on there straight. And of course, this red tape on the back of the LCD has to go, as well as the wax paper that we have on the new adhesive. Now, when I went to remove this paper, it's stuck to the reflective tape that goes behind the LCD, and you do not want that to come off of the phone. That's actually part of the display's illumination system. So make sure that this reflective stuff stays on the LCD as much as possible. It looks like they just kind of overdid this adhesive here, but we want to end up with a nice reflective mirrored background. And then of course, carefully maneuver these cables through the mid frame and make sure that they go all the way through. Some of them have a tendency to get stuck part ways. Your cables should be roughly the same length when they come through the frame. And if not, you're going to have some problems because they will not reach the pop connector on the logic board where you're going to plug it in. On this one, I also ran into a small problem because the front-facing camera guard was not aligned properly. And when I finally got the LCD in position, I had to go back and put the back plate that goes behind the front-facing camera back into position. It actually popped out of the frame. So that's not what this video is about, and I don't think you'll run into that problem. It's very rare. But keep an eye out for it. You shouldn't have to exert much force in order to install these, but sometimes these little corner legs get out of position, so you may have to straighten them out. If you're running into resistance when you put this in, take a look at what's going on, and if something doesn't line up properly, make sure that you adjust it so that it will. And of course, the lens should be flush with the mid-frame all the way around before we proceed any further. And I like to magnetize my driver again before I put these screws on the end. It helps to hold them in place. But we're going to have the side screws here. And then, of course, we've got 4 in the corner, 3 on each side. And again, I like to save the one near the headset jack until last because it usually tends to be the most difficult, but having these other screws installed first will sometimes help bring the display into the correct position. Again, you will have to be very patient once you get to that last screw. Sometimes it's a good idea to use a very slim driver, one with a smaller profile. These Huskies are a little tough to get inside Down here at the bottom of the phone, you'll notice that there's a ledge that's actually a little higher than the area where the charging port and speaker rest. So the important thing is that these little metal clips that are part of the antenna system on the bottom of the charging port have to be tucked behind that ledge. If you start to remove the charging port, they will tend to pop out and sit on top of the ledge. And if they do that and you press down, they will snap right off. So be sure that you seat these behind that ledge very carefully, and then you've got to sort of hold it in place as you continue to install the rest of the port. What makes this a little more difficult is there is a very small foam pad on the bottom of the port, so it's going to be a tight fit. And what you'll have to do is tuck in the upper end, hold it up against that ledge, and then slide it down into position on the bottom. Make sure that those four metal pieces don't pop up on the ledge, and at the same time you've got to get this little rubber piece seated down inside there. Now if it peels off, you can always push it back in, but this is the correct position for that to be in. So I'll show you here exactly how this is going to work. We're going to start with the upper end first, tuck that in behind the ledge, and then if you need to, you can always use a small plastic clamp or something to hold it. I'm going to hold it in place with one hand. If you've got a second hand, you can have somebody help you out with this, but keep that all the way inside as you install these screws. And remember, we do have a small plastic triangle that I'm going to fumble with here just a little bit, and that's going to go into the left hand side in this position that you see it on the screen right now. And picking this thing up and keeping it straight can be a little challenging, so be patient, but make sure that you include this part. It is required in order to keep the port in position. So once we get that into the right spot, we'll go ahead and put the last screw for the charging port in. And you'll see that these are all tucked behind that ledge that I was talking about. So now we can go ahead and put the buzzer back inside. It should be pretty apparent as to where this goes. If not, you can always use this video as a guide. And now we're going to be ready to go ahead and install the logic board. So this is going to go in top first, and it's going to tuck under a metal tab at the top of the frame. Make sure that you have this little rubber gasket, or not gasket, make sure you have this little rubber piece on top of the edge of the PCB. That's going to make sure that it doesn't cut through those cables. And then of course, make sure you do not trap any cables or antenna wires underneath the logic board as you install it. So remember, we've got the flex cables at the top, that small antenna wire, and then the one that's actually attached to the charging port. Make sure you do not trap those. Very important. I'll go ahead and put this screw into the center of the board, and once we get this one in, that will kind of make everything just stay in place, so you don't have to worry about holding it down anymore. And then we're going to go ahead and install the threaded barrels first. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll start out with a Phillips driver in order to get them threaded, and then you can switch over to the slotted end to fully install them. And again, be very careful here. You do not want your driver to slip while you're putting these in. If it does go skidding across the board, you can cause damage to the surrounding components, especially at the top. Now we've got one screw on the bottom left-hand side here, just above the buzzer. And then we can go ahead and start plugging these in. I'm going to test the LCD before we put all of the parts inside the phone, just to make sure everything's working properly. In the rare event that you get a bad component, it's best not to have a full installation completed, because then you've got to go back and remove everything. So what we need is basically just to have these cables connected. We'll put the battery inside the housing and make sure it does light up when we turn it on. Now this is the correct position for that camera grounding screw that I mentioned earlier, and the gold piece that's attached to it. So when you put that in, a lot of people get confused about this for some reason, so you can always refer to that diagram in order to see where it goes. And this antenna wire at the top can be a little bit tricky to get plugged in, But remember, never use force. It shouldn't take much to plug it in. If you're encountering resistance, it is probably not aligned correctly. As you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and connect the battery, set it inside the housing, and we'll flip it over. Just make sure that the screen's going to light up. And if you want to, you could perform a test of the digitizer at this point and make sure that the touch sensitivity is working properly. From here, I'm going to go ahead and put that little sticker back on top. First thing though, I'll have to disconnect the lens and LCD. So we'll go ahead and cover this hidden screw up like it was when we took the phone apart originally. And then of course we have that corner sticker that goes over this screw at the top left end. And you should have enough adhesive on there to where it will still stick. If not, you can always add some. Go ahead and plug in the camera, and we can reconnect the display. You will probably want to remove the battery before you connect that lower antenna wire. Remember, we do have a retaining clip here at the top with one additional screw that goes into that threaded barrel, so we'll go ahead and install that. And then if you want to, you can go ahead and put your EMI shield back into position. Make sure that that clip attaches at the bottom. If it got bent out of shape, you can actually straighten it out again so that it does latch at the bottom. And again, be very careful with that screw in the corner of the battery compartment. This last one I'm putting in right now, you do not want to over tighten this. If you do, you will snap off the threaded barrel that it feeds into. So you can see it's a little tricky to maneuver down here at the bottom end of the phone, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull the battery out so that we can get this lower antenna wire connected. And remember, it does kind of zigzag around those screws at the bottom, so you can always take a look at the beginning of the video if you're not sure exactly how that is going to be situated. From here, we can plug in the flex cable and the retaining plate that goes behind it. Before you plug in your battery, remember we do have that small black piece that covers the antenna wire. And of course, we want to make the battery the last thing that we plug into the phone. So we've got our two screws that go into the battery terminal. Go ahead and replace your back panel and your screws at the bottom. Make sure you put your SIM card back in the tray, and you can power the phone on at pretty much any point. Make sure you've got your screws fully installed, and you are good to go. If you found the video helpful, hit the like button and feel free to share it on the social network platform of your choice. Check out some of my recent repair and product review videos, and visit us on the web at gocellphonerepair.com. Thanks for watching.